So when I was a child, I had a thing called a BBC microcomputer, and I'm sure there were people in the audience who also had, of my sort of age, who had a BBC micro. We all had these computers in the 1980s in our bedrooms as children, and maybe we bought them to play games on, or we bought them to do our schoolwork on, but they all had one thing in common, and that thing was you turn them on and they go beep, and the first thing you can do with them is you can learn to program on them. In fact, if you want to do something other than learn to program with them, you have to make a conscious choice not to program. That's the very first thing you can do. And what this means is that most people my age who had any aptitude for computers had a chance to discover they had an aptitude for and an interest in computers. And they had a platform in their bedroom that they could use to do what I did, which was to hack on it every night and get good. Lots of people my age knew how to write at least that two-line computer program, 10 print I am the best, 20 go to 10. That fills up the screen, or 10 print something much filthier than that, 20 go to 10, and then go to Dixon's and type it into all of the machines and hit enter on all of them and run out the door and leave the guys running around trying to turn them off. So, and this was really fantastic. I mean, it was fantastic for me. The day I got my BBC Micro, my Lego went in a drawer and I never touched it again. It was a wonderful way to spend, 5 or 10 years of the end of my childhood. And what it meant was, when I pitched up at university to study computer science, I thought I knew everything about computers. And the very first thing I pitched up at Cambridge in 1996, and I was surrounded on my course with a bunch of other people who'd had broadly the same experience as me, which most of us came in the door having programmed computers for 10 years. The first thing the course had to do was to convince us that we didn't know everything. So there was a sort of a 10-week period at the start of the 60 weeks that Cambridge has to turn you from a sixth former into somebody who can start a PhD. The first 10 weeks largely consisted of hitting the students over the head with one or two implements to convince them that there were things that were worth learning, that there were things that you'd not learned in those 10 years in your bedroom. And this was a wonderful situation for Cambridge. It was a wonderful situation for the students. It was a wonderful time to be there. I arrived in 1996. I did my undergraduate, I did a PhD, and then towards the end of my PhD, I took a job as what we call a director of studies. And the job of a director of studies at a college in Cambridge is to organize the undergraduate teaching for their subject and to organize the supply of undergraduates. So to organize the supply of people to come and be the next batch of students. And it was a really dispiriting experience. I mean, it was lovely working with the kids, but what was really dispiriting was that I found that over those 10 years, the number of people applying to study computer science had halved, and the sorts of things that the people knew how to do had gone from, elaborate versions of that two-line prank program down to people who had maybe just done a web page. And so that first 10 weeks, where we were used to a world in which we had to spend those 10 weeks breaking people down and convincing them that they needed to learn, we had to spend that 10 weeks and more bringing people up to the kind of standard we used to be able to rely on. And this was becoming an enormous problem for the university. And then the whole Cambridge cluster, there's an enormous high-tech cluster in Cambridge, and the Cambridge cluster is reliant on a supply of talented ex-undergraduates. So this was a real problem. A group of us at the university sat down and thought, well, where has this problem come from? And what we put our fingers on, and we still don't know whether this is true, but what we put our fingers on was we said, well, maybe it's that people don't have those computers anymore. Those Commodore 64s and BBC Micros and Spectrums have been replaced by PlayStations and set-top boxes and tablets and mobile phones. They've been replaced by machines which are enormously powerful compared to what I used to have. But none of them are programmable. They're either not programmable or they're just very hard to get into programming. So we sat down and we thought, well, could we design a machine that could fill that niche? Is there a niche that we could try and fill? And we had the idea that we wanted to make a thing which was four things. It needed to be fun. It needed to get into kids' lives in the same way that those computers in the 1980s got into our lives. It was not a worthy device. It's a device that could do something interesting. For us, what that meant was games and video. We wanted to have something which was programmable, obviously. We wanted to have something which was robust. You saw how little that thing was. It's designed to be pushed into a school bag and taken out 100 times without breaking. And we wanted to have something which was cheap. And our idea of cheap was, well, you can ask a child to buy a school textbook. So if we can make this thing as cheap as a school textbook, then we can ask children to buy them to learn to program on. And our idea of what a school textbook cost was $25 US, so about £15. It turns out that was a really optimistic view of what school textbooks cost these days. I think if we'd had a more accurate view of what school textbooks cost, we would have had a more interest. Everyone's a critic. So anyway, that was about 2006. We kind of blundered along our little ambition to just try and get 250 more people to to apply to read computer science. We're really nostalgic and romantic, and we really wanted to stick the BBC brand on this more than anything else. We've ended up with Raspberry Pi with quite a nice brand. We've got lots of followers on Twitter, and lots of people, many of you in this room have heard of us, and that's really good news. We never wanted a brand. We just wanted to stick the BBC name on it. We kept having these meetings with the BBC and saying, can we stick your brand on our computer? And they kept saying no for a variety of reasons. And the last time we tried this was just over 2 years ago, in May of 2011. We went along to see Rory Cellan-Jones, who's the BBC senior technology correspondent. His wife is, I believe, a BBC trustee, and we thought this was a really good combination. He's a senior on the journalist side. He's got good connections. I'm sure he'll say yes. And he said no as well. But what he said to us was, do you mind if I take a little video of this and put it on my blog? And because we're imbeciles, we said, yes, go ahead, sure, that'll be fine. We got 600,000 YouTube views in 2 days. And we're just a little charity. We've got 600,000 YouTube views in 2 days. And I remember sitting down across the dinner table from my wife, and I just sat at work pressing F5 for 2 days and watching my How Popular Are You number going up. I sat down opposite Liz, my wife, at the end of the second day, and we had that oh shit moment where we realized we'd promised 600,000 people that we would build them a $25 computer, and we had absolutely no money and absolutely no idea how we were going to do it. And so we spent 2011 trying to, A, figure out how to have some money, and B, figure out how to do it. We got towards the end of the year, and we were feeling pretty good. We'd managed to put it off, at least they're cheap, right? So you don't necessarily need that much money, $25. We were able to get together a quarter of $1,000,000 by throwing money in a hat, basically, a big hat. And so we were happy. We could build 10,000 of these, and we had a wonderful business model. We were going to build 10,000 of them, sell them, and then get our money back, and then build some more. But towards the end of 2011, we got the idea that perhaps these 10,000 weren't going to last us very long. We had a lot of interest bubbling up in social media. My wife is a freelance journalist, quit, stopped taking new commissions, started running our social media operation. We got a lot of interest. And we started to think these 10,000 units might only last us a few weeks. So there might be a nasty supply shortage, and we might get slated for it. And so what we did, we were very lucky. We'd set ourselves up as a very conventional no one manufactures anything anymore, but to the extent that anyone's a manufacturer, we were setting ourselves up to be a manufacturer. We were going to buy components, get some money, pay someone to stick them together, get the finished goods, and then ship them to people. And we were extremely lucky because we found just an amazing stroke of luck. We found two companies, two big UK PLCs, RS Components and Premier Farnell, who were prepared to license the design from us and license the brand from us and make them themselves and distribute them. And that turned out to be the thing that allowed us to win, or at least allowed us not to fail catastrophically. So in the last 2 months, we launched on the 29th of February last year. In the last 2 months, between the 1st of January and the 29th of February, we changed ourselves. We pivoted round from being a capital-constrained, basically screwed company who were going to try and do this amazing thing with hardly any money, to being an IP licensing company. All we do is we design a thing, and then we license it out, and we collect a royalty. And that's what allowed us to grow. We launched on the 29th of February. We signed we signed the two contracts with the two companies. We signed one at 6 p.m. We queued up, a very similar experience to you, we queued up an enormous amount of press coverage, and we signed one contract at 6 p.m. on the 28th and one at 2 a.m. on the 29th. And we launched at 8 a.m. on the 29th, took down both companies' websites for the whole day, sold 100,000 Raspberry Pis. And so we found out the answer to how long will your 10,000 last, and the answer is about an hour. So that was really fortunate. We've had a great year since. We've sold 1.5 million Raspberry Pis. We're starting to get, lots of those have gone to geeks. We kind of had this feeling that what we need to do is fill the community of adult technical hobbyists or geeks before we would reach any children. We do think a few 100,000 of our 1.5 million have ended up in the hands of children. We see these wonderful anecdotes. Parents send us pictures of their children doing cool stuff with the Raspberry Pi, learning to program. So we think we're starting to make some progress. Those photos are the things we have had hard days, and those photos are the things that definitely the things that get us through the hard days. So I'm going to try and draw three lessons. One is the one that is up on the board, which is pivot. We were really badly screwed. We were 2 months away from running into a brick wall, and we changed our business model. And as a result of changing, had we not changed the business model, best case, I think we would have sold 30 or 40,000 Raspberry Pis last year, not 1.5 million. So not being too wedded to our concept of who we were and our concept of how we did business turned out to be our savior. Another one, similar related to that is scale, this idea of design for scale. Everything we do with Raspberry Pi has been about design for scale. So being an IP licensing company and getting your working capital from billion-pound PLCs is a great way to design for scale. Trying to focus on just doing the things you do well, i.e. designing the Raspberry Pi and running the brand, and letting other people do things like making cases. There is an enormous ecosystem of, again, very similar to your ecosystem, there's an enormous ecosystem of people around the Raspberry Pi who make stuff. And that, us not having to worry about all of those things has allowed us to do more, I think, as a project than we could have hoped with the people we had. And then the last one was kind of, for anyone, we're a charity, but it applies, I think, to everyone. We're living in an amazing time, right? I mean, we had 1 million years of, grubbing in the dirt to try to get enough food to stay alive, right? And then 200 years ago, there was no productivity growth, or there was such slow productivity growth that it was literally eaten by population growth. So we live in an amazing time. 200 years ago, something changed, and now if we don't get 2 or 3% a year growth, something's badly wrong, and we're unhappy about it. We live in a time when we have an enormous amount of personal power to do things that even our very recent ancestors could never have dreamt of. So it's a really amazing time to be alive, so make the most of it. Thank you.